So I'm going to be gluing up some fingerboards today. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to be epoxying some veneer to some fingerboards today. So black, white, African blackwood. So just get some wax paper. And because these are uke fingerboards, I can just fold this in half. Get two out of it. I'll show you some other stuff in a second. I think I have 10 fingerboards I'm doing. So I'm just layering them up. Just to be completely prepared when I mix up the epoxy. Nothing's worse than mixing up epoxy and then realizing you've got to do something that takes like 5 minutes to do. Because even though I'm going to be using slow set epoxy, I'm doing so many fingerboards that I'm going to need the full 20 minutes to get it all done before the epoxy starts to go off, that is. Okie dokie. So I've got that one and this one. 1, 2, 3. So I'm doing 8. And the reason why I chose that depth was because of this truth. This is the clamp that I have the most of and that I'll be using the most. And just opening that up to its full width, it's pretty close. I could get another one in there, but you know, how many do you need? So that is good. Okay, so on to the mixing of the glue. Okay, to mix it up, I'll be using West's and the mixture is 5:1. I've just got a little bit left in the can and I've got more in the squeeze thing, which you'll see. So I'm just getting rid of the stuff in the can first. I think I'll mix up 50 grams of resin to 10 grams of hardener. Oh fuck. Oh fuck. My lid has a hole in it. Jesus Christ. Fucking stuff everywhere. This is kind of why I don't like to use epoxy for gluing up sides, just because it's messy. So 36. Can someone remind me to buy a new lid? Okay, now 10 grams of this. This is older hardener, so it's pretty dark, but it still works totally fine. These scales are great because they measure in 0.1 of a gram. And when you put the epoxy in a squeeze bottle like this, it's very good. Sit on your goddamn epoxy lid. Might be time for a new scale. Okie doke, so 60 grams of epoxy. This is because I've got a fair bit of epoxy in here. It's going to heat up and cure quicker. So what I'm going to do is mix this up and then pour half of it into another little container. It'll just prolong everything a bit. When you're using, 60 grams of epoxy, which is, a fair bit, it's enough to melt a plastic cup like this. This must be the most boring video to watch. If I remember, I'll speed this part up. But this is a good lesson in how long to mix epoxy for. Should do it for about a minute. Depending on how much you've got, I suppose, but okay. As I use this, I'll be continuing to mix that just because. Okay. So I've got my cheap brushes here. So I don't know if this amount of epoxy is going to be enough to do all 8, but if it isn't, just mix up more, it's fine. You can see how dark the epoxy hardener turned after a few years. That's just an aesthetic thing, which doesn't concern me for this particular glue up job. If I was gluing like a maple fingerboard to a maple neck or something, it would be a problem because you'd have a dark line, or a darker line than you normally get, and you always get a dark line with an epoxy glue line. Okay. One done. So put this on top. You don't want to be too messy with this because the bottom of this black veneer is going to be glued to the neck, so you don't want, you know, a lot of epoxy on the other side of it. There's always some that gets on there, but just as long as you're not bathing in it, should be fine. You just sand it, scrape it off. This is also the method for if you want to glue up heel caps in bulk or headstock veneers. Getting a bit of crap on the bench, so just be careful of that, and on the gloves. So just gonna, you know, just mix the epoxy as you go. I always forget to mark down somewhere how much epoxy I need for a fingerboard like this. So after I do this video, I'll know. These fingerboards haven't been thicknessed yet, because I do that and I sand them down after I do this job. But they have been sanded both sides just to clean them up from being bandsawed to reasonable thickness. Okay, that's one tower down, or whatever you want to call it. So the glue is going to be about right, because I could probably do 10 fingerboards with 60 grams. Maybe not actually. Maybe 9. But so with epoxy, I use the slow setting stuff because even if you use the fast, you still have to wait all day or overnight. So you might as well just get the slower stuff. I think it dries harder as well, or dries stronger. I'm not sure. That might be not quite accurate, but okay, on to the next. I can feel this warm. The epoxy is warming up. So this one, this tub will go off quicker. Another reason why I'm using epoxy for this is because epoxy doesn't have any water in it. So if I was going to be using a water-based glue like titebond or hide glue, it would have way more chance of buckling. And so epoxy is probably the glue of choice for like large layups like this. Sometimes veneer or wood soaks up glue a lot quicker, so just look for dry spots. When you're gluing on backs and tops, put glue on the end block first, on the butt block. That's usually, especially if you're using plywood, which is the best end block because it doesn't crack. But the end grain of the plywood will suck up the glue a bit quicker, so by the time you get back around to it, you can put on another layer of glue and all is good. So I've got just enough epoxy here, which is great. So 60 grams for 8 uke fingerboards. And these fingerboards are 2 inches by about 12 inches, I think. So keep that for tomorrow. It's good just to, first thing I do when I come in the morning after a glue up like this is to check that epoxy in the tub or container, just to make sure it's gone off. So I just have to align these well now. It does get a little slippery. Put all the fingerboards in the same area. Don't worry about any epoxy on the wax paper. Okay. Start from one end. And just be careful of everything slipping. Which is frustrating. The epoxy and the wax paper, it does get slippery, but looks like it's behaving for us, which is good. So just alternate the direction of the clamps. just make sure the end clamp is kind of near the end of the fingerboards. So you'll be able to see this if I do this. You can see the fingerboard ends are pretty close together. One down. I've got two fingerboards that are a little bit longer. They're Macassar ebony from LMI, so I'll just put these on the bottom because these blocks are a little bit longer. So I'm kind of registering off this end more. This first clamp is always the trickiest. There's a little bit of fingerboard. Actually, it's right on the end. But if that was coming out a bit, I wouldn't be concerned, just because the Uke fingerboards from LMI are a bit longer than I need. I'm going to be chopping it off. I usually do this at the last thing at the end of the day. One, because epoxy fumes, even though they don't smell that bad. I can't actually smell it, but it's just something laying on the floor that I'm going to be kicking around all day now. And when I take them out, they will look like this. This is for Len. It's a Brazilian rosewood fingerboard. This hasn't obviously been fretted or sanded to its final dimension, so a little bit of epoxy up here doesn't matter. Little bit here doesn't matter. It's going to get, tapered down and everything. But that's the end result. Still dirty up here, but so you can see, even with that dirty epoxy, that white line stays nice. Doesn't, you know, bleed into it and kill everything. And this is a tapered one already. So that's with it, you know, after it's been cleaned. And nice clean line. So that acts as a purfling line. The other way to do it is to this is carbon fiber, but pretend it's an ebony binding. So binding with purfling on the bottom, then you glue it to the side. But it's even when you know that lining up a line is really hard. It's and you try really hard not to mess it up. You still do, I find anyway. So when you miter the corners here, it's really hard to get the white to line up all the way around. So this is the easiest I've found. Then I route a ledge onto that and put the binding onto that ledge, but the binding doesn't have a purfling on it, so that becomes the purfling line. It's the best and easiest way I've found to do it. So that is fingerboard glue ups. Thank you.